While we are gathering virtually today, we acknowledge that each of us is on the traditional territory of many nations across Turtle Island. We broadcast from Toronto, the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, it is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We offer this acknowledgement as a stepping stone towards honoring the original occupants, a testimony to the oppression faced by Indigenous peoples, and our commitment in this series to creating dialogues aimed at addressing such systemic injustice. Yes!
Okay.
Hi,
Rhea. Hi!
Nice to see you again, my friend. How are you today?
Haven't seen you in so long. I'm doing good, but I'm kind of sad. I can't believe this is our last episode.
I know, right? It went by so fast. It's unbelievable. And I just want to keep going because we're learning so much, talking to so many incredible people.
I was just going to say there's more to learn. I think the biggest takeaway for me has been that everyone is at different phases in the journey, and that digital learning can have pros and cons for different people. And I think that's something that I wasn't as mindful about before.
I love that. I feel like I've learned just how much more I have to learn. Honestly, that is my greatest gift from this series, is talking to so many folks who do this work and who are out in the world living, different experiences. Like, there's just so many more conversations I want to have and feel like, we as a collective can have to hold space to continue to learn and unlearn.
Absolutely. So without further ado, it's our last episode. In French, they would say the piece de résistance. In today's show, we'll take a look at how we can ensure that we all are using more inclusive language when it comes to storytelling. We had a chance to sit down with the incredible Shayla Stonechild. She is the founder of the Matriarch movement, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to amplifying Indigenous voices through story, meditation, movement, and medicine. She's the host of APTN's Red Earth Uncovered, a trauma-informed yoga instructor, and received the title of the Métis Youth Ambassador of Alberta. Shayla works with many First Nation and Métis communities promoting suicide prevention by sharing her personal story and promoting good health and physical health. Let's take a look. I'm really excited about this conversation. Shayla, we are so excited to welcome you to the show. I'd love to ask you the question that we are truly asking everybody. How are you doing?
Thank you for asking, and thank you for having me. To be honest, I just got off like a month of burnout. Starting 2021 just felt like an extension of 2020. And I feel like there's a lot of collective grief going on, and there's a lot of the unknown. So I thankfully took the month to recenter, refocus. And so now I'm feeling a little bit recharged, and I'm looking forward to what 2021 has in store.
Yes, so important to recharge. I always say we pour from our overflow, not a half full or a full cup. It's the overflow, right? Exactly. But I want to get right into it because we have such a good show today. And I would love for you to share with everyone a little bit about your Indigenous roots and how you've used that in your journey today.
For sure. So my mom is Métis, Loriolette, and my dad is Plains Cree from Musqueam First Nation. So I'm Plains Cree and Métis from Musqueam First Nations Treaty 4 territory, but I've been living on the unceded Coast Salish territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people for about 8 years now. Being Indigenous is so intertwined with my life that I can't separate the two. I can't fragmentate it. It's woven throughout my life. It's woven throughout my history. It's woven throughout Canadian history. So it really creates the foundation within my life.
We're so excited to have you here today. And, you put such beautiful energy into the world. And, one of the things that we'd love to start with is what are some of your own personal lived experiences that you're comfortable sharing around systemic racism, and sort of how that's shown up for you in your own life?
For sure. Before I begin with my own life, I feel like I have to give credit to my family and to my parents. My father went to residential school and he was also in the prison system most of his life. And so, having our language and our values and our worldview torn away from the genocide that happened towards Indigenous people, whether that be physically or emotionally or spiritually, I didn't get the opportunity to grow up with what I could have grown up if that didn't happen within our history. And so for me, there's a lot of intergenerational trauma. My cousin was also Neil Stonechild, who unfortunately was killed at the hands of the police in Saskatchewan. And so it's kind of woven throughout my life. But for me, I have to say, I don't like using the word I'm privileged, but in a way, I didn't have to go through what my parents went through or what my grandparents went through. And so intergenerational trauma is a real thing, and systemic racism, you can see it. If you want to read a newspaper article about any Indigenous politics here in Canada, you can see racism just on social media. Anytime I post something and it goes kind of viral, there's a lot of trolls and a lot of people that also comment, no one cares about Indigenous people. Why are you still bringing this up? It's happened so long ago. And so you can literally look for it within your fingertips, really, on social media. For me, though, I really reframed the way I looked at things. And instead of looking at it as just like intergenerational trauma, I really looked at it as wisdom and resilience. And so I reframe it every time. And I really choose my battles now on who to really communicate with and create a connection with, and who just I don't need to.
So powerful. Just like wondering, how did you learn to do that as a life coach and someone who, and Jody as a mentor, and a lot of the work that we do, we're often telling people who are adults about how to shift their mindset. And you taught that to yourself at such an early age, which is like totally off the top of my head. I'm thinking, how did you do that?
Well, at 16, yeah, at 16, it was a big shift in my awareness, because my father, in a system that wanted to kill his spirit, it eventually did. And he ended up taking his life in the prison system. And so there was a really big shift in my awareness as a 16-year-old. I was just like, I never want anyone to feel that low again, especially Indigenous people. And so I want to do everything in my power to inspire or to help Indigenous people, Indigenous youth, so that they never want to take their lives, because suicide is a leading cause of death in Indigenous communities, and most of our communities are made up of youth. And so at 16, I really used that anger that I had, and I used that to catalyze and reframe and do all the work. That was my initial refocus. But for me, I've also had a lot of mentors that have helped me and have guided me too, as well as my yoga practice and meditation.
Talk to us a little bit about the matriarchy, and specifically you creating the matriarch movement. To me, that sounds like the torch being passed right down to you and your siblings and to all of us.
For sure. So the matriarch movement actually came to me in a dream 2 years ago. And I believe your dreams are messages from your ancestors and from your guides. And so they kind of put the pieces together for me. The word matriarch means a woman who's the head of a family or a tribe, a powerful woman. And the word movement means a change or development. And so I had already been working in Indigenous communities for, since I was 16. And that's because I followed my mom's footsteps, who was also working in Indigenous communities. And so having that dream, it kind of put the yoga and the Indigenous knowledge into one. And then I had my first photo shoot and video shoot with 11 Indigenous women throughout Canada, who came together to speak their stories of how they reclaimed their resilience and how they reclaim their power. Because I looked around at I looked around in the external world and I saw mainstream media always highlighting Indigenous women from a state of vulnerability, from a state of lack, from a state of survival. And when I looked at my communities and my support systems, that's not what I saw. I saw women who were powerful, who were trailblazing, who were taking care of their families. And I was like, this is what I want to be highlighted, and this is what I want to be shown. In a lot of traditional societies for Indigenous people, there was a balance of the masculine and the feminine. And some actually had women as the leaders of the tribe. The matriarchs, they were really held in high regard. And it was actually through the introduction of the patriarchy and the wounded masculine that tore women away from their well-respected roles. And so now, and there's a shift in consciousness happening now where there's a rise and a reclamation of Indigenous women and women in general who are saying, hey, we need the balance of both to become whole and to become integrated and to walk this world in a healthy way.
Talk to us a little bit about the power of storytelling in the Indigenous community and how we can actually learn from you and the Indigenous community to help us even better as a community, as a society in our inclusion journey.
Well, I think storytelling is woven throughout Indigenous culture and Indigenous teachings. You look at our creation stories and our individual stories, and they're woven together. You can't have one without the other. And then you look at oral tradition. We really spoke and passed down traditions through oral tradition, not because we're stupid or didn't know how to read or write or we weren't uneducated, but we knew the power behind our frequency, behind vibration, behind tone, behind sound. And we also knew the power behind truth telling and truth seeking. And so I think in a lot of storytelling, that's kind of what's been lost is where's the truth within some of these stories. And I think that's when you're missing people's voices and you're not representing the entire population, BIPOC people, you are missing that truth. You're missing the truth within our own communities. And so listening to us would be the first step. I think look at who you follow on Instagram, look at who you read, what books you read, look at what TV shows you watch. I mean, one way to learn is really to take a moment and just sit back and listen for once.
How can companies engage in inclusive storytelling that highlight underrepresented voices?
I think through hiring and through funding. I think diversity is one thing, having us represented in commercials and television and, magazines is one thing, but including us in the conversations and doing action behind that too. I feel like there's a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion, but there's no real action behind what people are saying. And so, inviting us is one thing, but also at the same time, some of us are just over wanting to be invited, where we're just like pushing the table out of the way and making our own. So the other step would be funding people that are already doing these projects, because there's a lot of BIPOC people out there that are already creating stories, telling their stories. And so partnering together to uphold and use your privileges or your powers that you have to the underrepresented communities would also be a one way. So hiring, listening, funding.
Could you share any practical ideas or tips around how folks who do want to share power or act in solidarity as allies can invite the space for that storytelling? What is a way to literally invite folks to show up as they are with their beautiful sort of way of sharing through story?
I think before you have to invite someone, you first have to do the education to make sure that you don't cause more harm towards those communities. So it would be doing the internal work to check your biases, to check your stereotypes, to check, where did I even learn this information from? So doing the work, a good journal and a good book is White Supremacy by Layla Saad, I believe her name is. And she actually gives you a journal and she gives you all the definitions to really start to internalize this work so that when you do invite people that you're not causing more harm.
So the work you're doing is incredible. How can people get involved and support you as you're building your movement?
Yeah, so there's a few things. I actually have a podcast coming out for the Matriarch movement. So I'll be interviewing Indigenous women through that. I'll be posting that on social media. I also have a necklace, two necklaces coming out, one with Paris Jewelers. That's a golden arrowhead. All proceeds are going to go to the Matriarch movement, the nonprofit. So you can purchase one of those. That's coming out on March 8th. I also have another necklace because right now we just are creating funding and resources so that I can eventually hire more Indigenous women to also be working for the Matriarch movement. And to find out more information, you can also follow me on Instagram at Shayla0H. You can also follow the Matriarch.movement, and I'll just be posting everything we're doing through that as well.
So we're just encouraging everyone to do a lot of the work on your own, do some research, and have these tough conversations. Learn, unlearn, relearn. It takes work, but it's absolutely worth it so that we can truly create a more inclusive world where everyone can feel like they're seen, heard, belong, and that where they've come from is understood. So, Shayla, thank you so much. We're so happy that you could join us a day before your birthday. Pisces, baby!
Pisces
Happy
season! Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Little dance for your birthday. We loved sitting down with our next guest, Julian Mitchell. Julian is a profound storyteller. Julian's an award-winning content editor, multimedia journalist, and the co-founder of IQ Labs. He's a former Forbes columnist and has spearheaded content and campaigns for brands such as Beats by Dre, Google, the NFL, and Magic Johnson Enterprises. He teaches brand storytelling for T-Mobile for Business and recently worked on the Steve McQueen anthology, Small Acts. What's up? Welcome to the show.
What's going on? How are you both doing? It's great to meet you.
Great to meet you. Let's start with you. How are you doing today? We like to know how you're really doing.
Yeah, I feel good. I feel really good today. It's a beautiful day out. The energy feels good. Very focused, very locked in, just staying low, staying focused. But I feel really good, like mind, body, and spirit, healthy, happy, in a good space.
Could you share with us a little bit around your perspective as such a powerful storyteller, the power of story to really drive inclusion in a sustainable way? Because I don't think all companies understand how important that is. So what's your perspective on that?
That's an incredible question and an important question because we think of story as a marketing strategy. That's the core of the first issue and when I say issue, I just mean that's something where collectively brands can get better at understanding and embracing that story is everything, meaning we all have a story. When we talk about what connects people, anybody from all walks of life, any race, gender, sexuality, it's story. You could go walk in a Target and randomly stumble upon somebody you like the same thing, like the same bag of chips, and you get into why you both like the same bag of chips. There's a story in everything. So it's bigger than a marketing strategy. That's the first piece. So when you think of it as, it's not just about how do we use story to accomplish a business goal, and you say that any business goal you have can get accomplished through story, like through investing in stories, then I think it changes the whole dynamic of how you operate your brand, how you build your brand, who you put in position to tell stories at your brand or at your company. I think that's the first part. And then second is, you can never underestimate the power of your perspective. And that's something we do as well, right? Like I have a perspective and I embrace that and I share that and I push myself to grow and evolve so that the stories I tell grow and evolve and the way I look at things grow and evolve, right? But we all have our own perspective. Like we all have our very own unique perspective about who we are, what we've been through, what we care about in the world. In brands and companies, it's the same thing. If you are a brand in this era, it's about humanizing your brand. Your brand should be more like a person than a building, than an icon, a symbol. So if your brand was a person, What are the conversations your brand is having with real people? What are the stories you're sharing about yourself with real people? And that is the gateway to truly connecting, number one, your real audience, because a lot of times when you're using story as a marketing strategy, you're projecting and just kind of assuming and picking who your audience is and who you think is going to resonate with that. When you tap into an authentic story and real stories, you discover who your audience really is. You discover all the people who actually connect with that. So it may not even be the whole demographic you spent money researching. It may be a whole different group of people. So I think you discover the audience, you get into a space where you can own your identity as a brand, which is what gives brands power. Apple owns its identity. Amazon owns its identity. You know, Tesla, Elon Musk, they own their identity, right? Because it's almost like when you see Tesla, it has its own identity the same way Elon Musk does, right? Amazon, the same as Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, and Microsoft. Like, their story and their brand story embody their mission and their movement, and everything they do is connected to that story. So I think it's incredible. It's the key. It's the secret. It's the cheat code. It's everything to,
I love that,
the real goal.
I wanted to, because that's so important for the people who are at the decision-making table to sort of understand this aspect. So just to round us out here, if you could maybe give us a couple of ideas, in your opinion, or strategies of how brands and companies can do a better job of how they incorporate representation within their own companies. Maybe just two high-level examples, so for anyone listening at home.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one, you need to see it as an ecosystem. When I say ecosystem, the people in the building, the people you're connecting with outside of the building, and the people that you're ultimately being influenced by and shaped by as a collective. So I think the first thing you should do, especially in an era of storytelling, is hire diverse storytellers. Like, people do not need to have gone to ad school or got a degree in communications in this era. We're in the era of social media, TikTok, short form video, etc. People tell stories and translate them in so many different ways. And content could be a text message, an email, an editorial, a video. Hire diverse storytellers that understand and can tap into conversations that really matter. And then I would say too, you know, when it comes to inclusive storytelling, or what brands can do in that respect, is invest in other people, platforms, and movements that are already telling these stories. You know what I'm saying? Like, be able to position yourself as a company, as a partner, as an investor, as a collaborator, and be able to use your platform to elevate their platform. And you can associate yourself with more diverse stories, more diverse storytellers, more diverse audiences. And from out of that, more products, more platforms, more experiences.
I think what you said is such great information for everyone at home, not just execs or CEOs or brand heads, but for everyone. These are tools that we can use right here at home within ourselves. And the piece that you spoke to about the ecosystem really resonated with me. So thank you so much for sharing. The storyteller, I just can't wait to learn more from you and improve my storytelling as well. So really, really grateful for you to be here. And we appreciate your time and showing up for us and continuing to be a role model for a lot of young people watching as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been an honor, a privilege. I appreciate the platform and the conversation. Happy to be here. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Like you said in the beginning, gratitude.
Rhea, I have learned so much today. I'd love to chat with you a little bit about what we learned about language, because I think it's something that so many of us have the opportunity to be much more intentional about. Can you share a couple of your insights reflecting on our conversations today?
Absolutely. I think, as a life coach, I'm so big on language that people use when they're talking to themselves about themselves, but also the language they're using when they're talking about others and sharing it, telling stories. And something I've learned along my journey, learning more about Indigenous awareness and conversations with people like Shayla, a couple of things and terms that I've seen and heard be used a lot that we should steer away from. Number one is powwow. A lot of people in the corporate space use that to describe a meeting when truly it's a sacred ceremony. And so if you are not from Indigenous background, using it to call a meeting is not actually what it is. So let's steer away from using that. And the second one is the term bottom of the totem pole to describe something that they deem less important or negative. And that is also disrespectful to the Indigenous community, because the bottom of the totem pole is actually the most important part. It's the foundation. It's the strongest part. Again, a sacred part of their culture. So using that term doesn't even make sense, and we should steer away from that in a way to honor Indigenous cultures, because our language is so powerful, and we need to be able to do better at honoring a lot of the things that were taken away from our Indigenous communities. So that's one of the biggest things that I've learned.
One of the tools that I personally am going to be learning from is a course that's offered through the University of Alberta on Indigenous Canada. And this is, an online course that's offered through the Faculty of Native Studies that explores Indigenous histories and contemporary issues in Canada. And, I know for myself, the journey of learning and unlearning will be forever to be able to be a better part of our Canadian and global society, as well as to better stand in solidarity with those folks who have a different lived experience than me.
Yes, please make sure we share that, because that's a course that I want to take as well. Always about learning and growing, and us being friends, sharing together. So thank you for sharing that.
For sure. Let's do it. So friends, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. But before we go, as usual, we want to send everyone away with a challenge.
Absolutely. We're sad, but we're constantly here to continue the learning and growing with all of you at home. So this week, we want you to think about how we can all bring inclusive language and storytelling to the forefront at home and at work. When we are able to achieve this, we bring people along the journey and bring another dynamic to learning.
Exactly. It is so important for each of us to think about the narrative in the stories we are hearing and sharing, and where those stories are coming from, to be mindful of what lens and lived experiences we may be leaving out.
Couldn't agree more. So from the bottom of our hearts, we want to thank all of our guests, but especially Shayla and Julian for joining us today, and most importantly, all of you for joining us at home along this Elevate Equality series. We really appreciate it. Keep the conversation going online using the hashtag Elevate Equality. We look forward to continuing to guide and support you and all of us on our DEI journeys. We'll share key learnings and highlights from the series in a blog post, and watch out for that email. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.